Welcome to this short introduction to the concepts of digital preservation for cultural heritage organizations, hosted by the Sunshine State Digital Network. Let's start with what digital preservation is. Digital preservation is the active, ongoing process to manage all your digital objects and ensure continued accessibility to those objects over time. Digital preservation is not something you can simply turn on and never pay attention to again, because digital objects are complex. They include both the content file, such as a PDF or TIFF file, with its corresponding metadata for that content file. The metadata is important. You can't do much with the file if you don't know what kind of a file it is, so your technical metadata, what its content is, descriptive metadata, or what may have been done with the file in the past, administrative metadata. Because digital preservation is about the active management of digital objects, there are big picture steps to be taken as part of the work. These include monitoring the integrity or bit level of your digital objects to make sure nothing has been changed or become corrupt over time, determining the security and access needs to your digital preservation objects, which should be different from your public access copies of your digital objects you use on a regular basis, monitoring the authenticity or provenance of your files, which includes documenting where the object came from, what's been done to it over time, and why you did something to it. In other words, maintaining the metadata of your digital objects helps to maintain the authenticity of them. And then lastly, you may need to migrate to a different file format or storage location over time. An example of a typical standard used for digital preservation systems is the OAIS, or Open Archival Information System model. The OAIS model is a conceptual framework for an archival system that's dedicated to preserving and maintaining access to digital information over the long term. Now let's discuss what is not digital preservation for a moment. Backups are not digital preservation. Backups are meant to restore in the case of a system failure. Digital preservation is for the long-term preservation of materials beyond a system failure. Backups can and should be part of a preservation plan, but they cannot be the start and end of that plan. Digitization is also not preservation. You would need to preserve the digitized copy after all. Digitization can be used, like backups, as a preservation strategy in part of a wider preservation plan at your organization, but again, it cannot be the only part of that plan. Digital preservation is also not having your material simply on a hard drive in a closet that you never touch, or worse, having your digital object stored on an external media that is fast having issues with finding hardware to play it on. For example, new computers don't come with CD drives anymore, so how are you going to access the CDs you made for your digital preservation plan? So now that we know what is and is not digital preservation, let's talk about why you should care about digital preservation at your organization and what could also go wrong before you start digital preservation. One, digital objects are not going away. In fact, we're making more of them all the time. Everyone is creating digital records at all times every day, 365 days a year. And due to rapid technology changes, that means obsolescence is a guarantee and will happen sooner rather than later. Also, technology breaks a lot. Your storage media won't turn on. Your ingest process to put materials online fails. Files won't transfer off a CD for you if you're lucky enough to have a CD drive to read the media. Digital objects are also complex, and they have a lot of dependencies, like the technology one I just mentioned, but also they might require a specific operating system or a certain software version. Do those things even still exist when you go back to try and access your content files? Also, another thing that can go wrong is humans. We mean well, but we're often a part of the challenge when it comes to digital preservation. Also, there are things to consider at an institutional level. Your digital objects took time and effort to create and or collect. So there's a risk to the institution if they were to be lost or become inaccessible. You need financial support, policies in place for when people leave, and an understanding throughout the organization that digital preservation is important work that needs to be supported at all levels. Another reason to be concerned is misplaced or poorly executed or collected metadata that follows no standard, which means you're lacking information about the digital object in order to properly preserve or access it over time. And then lastly, natural disasters. We here in Florida live in an area of the country that needs to include digital preservation in our disaster planning for when natural disasters hit our area.
So, where can you start to address digital preservation at your organization? First, you can begin by creating an inventory. This doesn't have to be fancy. A spreadsheet that lists what collection it is, where it is stored, what file formats it has, and how big it is in megabytes, gigabytes, or even terabytes can all get you started. This requires you to hunt up what may be on local computers versus servers versus third-party vendors versus website. But this will get you started on creating that inventory. Also, make sure the inventory is not siloed. Store it in a place that everyone in the organization can see, add notes, and can access. And then on this inventory, also mark areas of concerns within collections, potential copyright, privacy, or legal issues with those collections. Those may need to be dealt with sooner rather than later due to the nature of the content. Next, you can outline a digital preservation policy. Just because something is digital does not mean it must be preserved forever. Archival appraisal and selection still apply. We don't need it and cannot afford to save it all. Storage is cheap is not actually that true when you start to talk about terabytes worth of materials. And digital preservation in general is also not cheap. It takes a lot of human resources, time, training, and expertise to create a preservation policy and plan. Match your policy with your mission. Use policies you already may have about collection development, institutional priorities, and your core record and content types to get you started. You do not need to reinvent the wheel completely. Many institutions have written and shared their digital preservation policies online. Look at comparable institutions to yours for guidance, and if you don't see one, ask the institution. A lot of institutions are doing this work or starting to and are happy to share information. Digital preservation can be overwhelming, but the good news is you don't need to try to do all the things all at once. Start from where you are and start small. Maybe focus on just one collection at first. Create an inventory and then use that to develop your organization's digital preservation policy. And this could help to move forward to outline possible solutions for collections that you're working on currently. Experiment, learn, and ask questions as you get started. Remember, a lot of organizations are also just getting started, and the profession itself is always reevaluating best practices around digital preservation. Being the best stewards we can be of our collections will be part of an ongoing, active process to preserve and provide access long-term to our digital objects. Here are a number of resources you can consult as you begin to think about digital preservation at your organization. Thank you for watching this video. Please check the SSDN website for upcoming events and resources to support your digital preservation efforts.